Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise surrounding the South Burlington school budget vote. There's a lot of information and, frankly, a lot of misinformation floating around. So our goal here is simple, to break it all down and give you the facts you need to make an informed decision. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll go after that big 8.76% tax projection you've probably heard about. Then, we'll get into the two separate things you're actually voting on, the operating budget and a surplus fund. After that, we'll explain how your tax bill really works here in Vermont, because it's not what you might think. And finally, we'll zoom out and look at the last few years of cuts to see how we got here. Okay, first things first. Let's talk about that number that's been causing a lot of heartburn around town. This is the big one, right? Is this number for real? Are you looking at an almost 9% hike? Let me just be super clear. No. That 8.76% figure, you can pretty much forget about it. It's an early projection and a wildly inaccurate one at this point. It's based on old data from way back in December, and things have changed a lot. So you're probably asking, why is it wrong? Well, there are three really big reasons. First, the governor is stepping in with $115 million from the state's education fund specifically to buy down tax rates statewide. Second, a key factor in the state's funding formula is looking about 3% better than they thought it would. And maybe the most important piece of the puzzle, your local school district doesn't actually set your tax rate. The legislator in Montpelier does, and they won't finalize that number until much later this spring. Okay, so with that tax myth busted, let's move on to the first big decision you have to make at the polls, the operating budget itself. What you're really looking at here is a choice between two very different paths. You've got Path A, the budget the school board is proposing with a 3.4% spending increase, and then there's Path B, which is what the board has said they will do if Path A doesn't pass. They'll bring back a budget with a 0% increase. Now, it's really important to understand this. The 3.4% budget is not some kind of spending spree. Actually, to get down to that number, the district has already made almost $2 million in cuts. And these are significant leadership roles we're talking about. The communications director, the director of technology, and the director of student support services are all eliminated in this proposal. And those cuts in the 3.4% plan also include reducing two nursing positions. That's the district's lead nurse and a nurse who works across both the middle and high schools. The idea here was to try and make productions away from the classroom as much as possible to protect core instruction. But what if voters say no to this 3.4% plan? Well, the school board has been crystal clear on this. They're not just going to go back and trim a little here and there. They've stated they will come back with a budget that has a 0.0% spending increase. And let's be clear about what a 0% budget actually means. It doesn't mean costs just magically freeze. You still have things like contractual salary increases and rising health insurance costs. So if you're not increasing spending, that money has to come from somewhere. And in this case, it means making some really deep cuts. We're talking about the equivalent of losing about 13 more teachers from the district. And you would feel those cuts immediately, right in the classroom. At the elementary schools, you're looking at bigger class sizes. In middle school, you'd see reductions in art, music, and world language classes. And the technology education program, it would be eliminated entirely. The story is the same at the high school. A 0% budget would mean cutting about 10 sections of science and 5 sections of math, and it would also hit the performing arts programs. These are the direct consequences, the real trade-offs of a flat budget. Okay, let's shift gears. There's a second, completely separate item on the ballot. This has nothing to do with next year's spending. This is about what to do with a budget surplus from a previous year. And this is another one we're hearing a lot. Does voting yes on this surplus article raise your taxes? And again, the answer is a simple, straightforward no. This is not new spending. Think of it this way. This is money you've already paid in taxes that the district just didn't end up spending. So how you vote on this has absolutely zero effect on your future tax bill. So what are you voting on then? A yes vote just means you're giving the district permission to move that leftover money, that $2.55 million, into a dedicated savings account for big-ticket building repairs. It's kind of like saving up for a new roof on your house instead of waiting for it to leak and then needing a huge loan. It's just smart, long-term financial planning that can actually prevent big tax hikes down the road. Okay, so we've talked about the two budget paths and the surplus. But how does this all translate to your actual tax bill? Because there's a really important part of the Vermont system that a lot of people don't know about. This is probably one of the biggest pieces of the whole puzzle. Take a look at this. More than half, almost 53% of homeowner households in South Burlington, they don't pay the full sticker price on their school taxes. Why? Because they get a tax credit from the state that's based on their income. And we're not talking about a few dollars here. The average credit for an eligible household in South Burlington last year was almost $2,000. That's a huge deal. It means for a majority of homeowners, what they actually end up paying is way, way lower than what you might think just by looking at the raw numbers. All right, last section. To really get why we're at this crossroads, you have to look at the bigger picture. This year's budget didn't just appear out of nowhere. This is part of a multi-year trend of cost containment. The district has been making cuts for years to manage rising costs. They cut over 23 positions back in fiscal year 24, then almost 7 more in fiscal year 25. So the proposal you're seeing now, it's really a continuation of that same strategy, trying to balance the books. So when you get right down to it, this is the question before the community. You have two paths. One tries to preserve the core programs in our schools by making strategic, mostly administrative cuts. The other path would hold the line on spending, but the cost would be felt directly in the classroom, with fewer teachers and bigger classes. The vote is really about how we, as a community, decide to strike that balance.